I'm Dina Weisberger.
I'm Peter Dolchin. We're both from the Global Partnerships Group on the Telco and Video Distributors team.
We'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Our talk is about destigmatizing suicide, and as someone recently affected by it, I learned while it might be a hard subject to navigate, it is also crucial we bring this topic from out of the shadows and into the light. The goal today, and for future talks at Google on suicide, is to raise awareness surrounding mental illness and help create a space for those affected by it to feel supported. So thank you for showing up and demonstrating your support. We and Nicole are on a mission to change the public perception of suicide by eliminating the silence around it. We believe one of the best ways to do this is to connect a real, beloved person to a deeply stigmatized word, suicide, through stories and images. Before Nicole talks about losing her daughter Dominique to suicide, she'll share a brief montage. While this may be emotionally evocative experience for many of you, we hope that it empowers those of you who are suffering to reach out for help, and for those who know a loved one who is struggling to approach them. With that said, we wanted to highlight the mental health resources available at Google and beyond. Because the topic of suicide is not one to be taken lightly, we want to encourage anyone with suicidal thoughts or just looking for someone to talk to please reach out to one of the resources listed here, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, the Crisis Text Line, and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which you can just find support. There are biological and psychological treatments that can help you address underlying mental health issues leading to suicide, and we want everyone to know there is a path forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. So on to our speaker for today. We are fortunate, and I'm personally honored to have Nicole Browning with us today. Nicole lost her beautiful and talented daughter Dominique to suicide in 2007 and has made it her mission to destigmatize suicide and mental illness. I've known Nicole since 2005 when I joined Viacom, which was MTV Networks at the time. Nicole led a team of over 100 people and was our fearless leader. In the span of my career, I've come across a few truly genuine and inspirational leaders, and Nicole is absolutely one of them. She's a very special woman, and I'm so grateful that she agreed to speak to us today. Nicole was a 21-year veteran at Viacom, earning her way to president of content distribution and partner marketing in 2000. While there, she increased revenue 10 times to over $2 billion annually, establishing her division as the company's second largest revenue producer and building a portfolio of over 20 valuable TV networks, including Nickelodeon, MTV, Comedy Central, and VH1. Prior to joining Viacom, Nicole held various management, sales, and marketing positions at Rainbow Media, The Weather Channel, Union Carbide, and Xerox. In 2007, after leaving Viacom, Nicole founded her consulting firm, Browning Media Consulting, which includes such clients as the BBC and Intel. Following her daughter Dominique's passing, Nicole also founded Dominique's Fund for Suicide Prevention, a nonprofit in honor of her late daughter, aimed at destigmatizing mental illness and suicide and heightening awareness of the magnitude of suicide as a global health crisis. Nicole, thank you for joining us to share your story. Nicole Browning.
Let him know that you know best, 'cause after all you do know best. Try to slip past his defense without granting innocence. Lay down a list of what is wrong, the things you told him all along. Pray to God he hears you, and pray to God he hears you.
That beautiful, happy-looking young woman could have been anyone's friend, cousin, sister, grandchild, colleague, roommate. a laughing, well-loved, accomplished college student. She was my daughter, Dominique. I always have to give myself a pat when I make it through that screen, that little video presentation without bawling my eyes out. Dominique participated in much that life offered her. She had wonderful friends, an adoring family. She was the kind of girl that all the girls would go to talk about their problems because she was so sensitive and empathetic. She was highly creative. She wrote moving poetry. She loved to travel. She adored her dogs. And she loved summers in Rhode Island, jumping off the bluff at the beach into the water with her cousins and her siblings. It was a favorite pastime of hers, actually, and playing Ollie Ollie Oxenfree well into the night. She sang like an angel. Her voice was incredible and moving. And she was in many high school musicals and college clubs and bands and singing groups. She was a busy, productive, and highly successful student, a college sophomore. But another activity also consumed my daughter's time, and that was fighting a terrible, insidious disease, a potentially fatal disease, a disease that attacked one of her central organs, her brain. It wasn't a disease that was visible to all, or even visible at all at times, nor was it a disease whose symptoms were constantly overwhelming or always present, though it was a disease that was always there in the shadow of her being. My daughter's disease was mental illness. She suffered from an eating disorder and bipolar disorder. Her depression especially was fierce. 11 years ago, at age 19, Dominique died by suicide. In the aftermath of her suicide, I've had to come to terms not only with my profound and terrible grief, but also with all the judgments that accompany a death by suicide. So let's be honest. Here are the kinds of things that people think, and sometimes even say, when they hear about a suicide. And I'm sure you could all add to the list. How could they do that to their family? Must have been another one of those drug and alcohol problems. That kid was crazy anyway. The whole family's nuts. There must have been something wrong with their upbringing. Where was the family? Weren't they paying attention? How could those parents let that happen? How could she have done that when there are so many others fighting desperately for their lives? Or, as in the recent celebrity suicides, how could they do that? They had everything going for them: fame, money, family, like really anything they ever wanted. How could they do that to their children? What an incredibly selfish act, or that's such a cowardly way out. Or, and I've been told, there isn't much that anyone can do to help someone who wants to kill themselves, which is just heartbreaking resignation by those convinced that suicide is often the unavoidable result of severe depression, and that there is nothing that we can do to change this. Suicide feels to those left behind like some kind of huge accusation, an accusation made only worse by the ignorance surrounding it. In fact, many people are so anxious to avoid the stigma that surrounds death by suicide that they'll only admit that a loved one was lost in a car accident, to an accidental overdose, to heart failure, and so forth. The humiliation is only intensified by these kinds of things that people say. Now, imagine you are the person actually suffering with a mental disorder and are having suicidal feelings. Imagine the shame and sense of burden to others. That is a difficult thing to overcome, So difficult, in fact, that it's often hard for those suffering to ask for help. They live instead in silent pain and despair. And in some cases, that can feel so isolating that the darkness turns inwards. A darkness that makes the possibility of leading a normal life seem like an impossibility, particularly and sadly acute among our youth, who have to handle all of this unnecessary shame with far less life experience. Basically, far less time to understand that what they feel doesn't have to always be that way. That leading a productive, fulfilling life is, in fact, a real possibility. We have, as a society, a real lack of awareness and understanding of mental illness. Mental illness is a disease that knows no socioeconomic boundaries and touches the lives of literally tens of millions. This is a disease that strikes our young as well as our adults. This is a disease that can be so debilitating as to profoundly affect productivity. This is a disease so misunderstood that's often viewed as something someone can, snap out of it, self-induced, that they could snap out of it if they had a choice, if they chose to do that. Most horrifying is that this is also a disease that threatens lives and claims many. Yet, shockingly, there is a significant lack of resources and research on the potentially fatal outcome of mental illness, which is suicide. This is a global health crisis, and yet so many ignore it as such. So you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? I believe that the prevention of suicide and all the research and the work needed is greatly hindered by the shame and fear so many feel about mental illness and suicide. Dialogue about this subject should not be taboo. A friend of mine shared a tragically sad story about a young 13-year-old that was starting to behave completely out of character. Her family thought she was having some sort of psychotic break. And as the child that this family knew slipped away, the doctors finally realized that she had a rare form of spinal meningitis. Her brain was deeply affected by the disease. It was a tragic situation. Nobody asked how she could do that to her family. She wasn't in control. The victims of mental illness should no more be judged than the victims of cancer, diabetes, or any other life-threatening disease. Nobody chooses to be stricken by any of these illnesses, and nobody is in control, and nobody blames them or their families. Nor is one in control when they kill themselves. Though that's very, very hard for us to grasp because suicide is self-inflicted, and it seemingly requires enormous control because it's completely contrary to every human basic instinct of survival. But when the brain is diseased, it often lacks the rational filters that influence choice. It's incomprehensible for those who have never experienced depression or other mental illness to fathom that one's brain could ever misfire to such a point. When individuals, like my daughter, are depressed and they make choices that are self-destructive, they are evaluating their options based on thinking that is distorted due to the disease. The pain of depression is so completely unimaginable to those who have never suffered it that it's hard not to think that one can't pull themselves up by their bootstraps and deal with it. Or simply put a smile on your face and then you'll be happy, which I have to confess is something that I might have said to my daughter early on in her illness. Sadness is not the same thing as depression. And understanding is even more complicated by the fact that it's an illness that doesn't necessarily take on physical, visible characteristics. There's no obvious broken bone, for example, or another sign that someone can point to. The raw and gnawing pain that leads one to suicide is so alien to most of our daily experiences. And throughout the years, I know you have all probably read things and listened to music and seen art by so many of these creative geniuses. They tried to depict the effects of depression in their work. Artists like Ernest Hemingway, Virginia Woolf, this might be really completely dating me here, but Edgar Allan Poe. Actually, these were books. Sylvia Plath, Diane Arbus, Vincent van Gogh, Bach, Schumann, Kurt Cobain, and recently David Foster Wallace. The list just goes on and on. Even the creatives who personally suffered the disease were unable to provide a clear and compelling description that enabled those unscathed by depression to fully comprehend it, though many have tried. I'm going to read you some of the things that I thought were very powerful. Sylvia Plath wrote this 5 years prior to her suicide. Quote, "I have been and am battling depression. I am now flooded with despair, almost hysteria, as if I were smothering. As if a great muscular owl were sitting on my chest, its talons clenching and constricting my heart." Sounds pretty painful, doesn't it? Unquote. Well, unquote before sounds painful. Edgar Allan Poe wrote this shortly after his suicide attempt. Quote, "I went to bed and wept through a long, long, hideous night of despair. When the day broke, I arose and endeavored to quiet my mind by a rapid walk in the cold, keen air. But all would not do. The demons tormented me still. I cannot live until I subdue this fearful agitation, which is, if continued, would either destroy my life or drive me hopelessly mad." Unquote. And for me, nothing helped me understand what my daughter suffered more than William Styron when he wrote his book, Darkness Visible, A Memoir of Madness. And this was the first book that I read about the subject after my daughter died. Quote, "For in virtually any other serious sickness, a patient who felt similar devastation would be lying flat in bed, possibly sedated, and hooked up to tubes and wires of life support systems, but at the very least in a posture of repose and in an isolating setting. His invalidism would be necessary, unquestioned, and honorably attained. However, the sufferer of depression has no such option and therefore finds himself, like a walking casualty of war, thrust into the most intolerable social and family situations. There he must, despite the anguish devouring his brain, present a face approximating the one that is associated with ordinary events and companionship. He must try to utter small talk and be responsive to questions and knowingly nod and frown and, God help him, even smile." Unquote. Thank goodness the mental health profession and our medications and all the things that are available for today have really come a long way since these writers wrote. I believe we can all help, and you are doing quite a bit here at Google today by simply opening yourselves up to the conversation and seeking to understand something that may be so completely unfathomable to you. I believe, as I know my daughter would have, that silence only makes the hopelessness of those who suffer that much worse. The CDC found that over half the people who died in 2016 had no known mental health condition. One can only surmise that for some of these people, particularly those that are successful or that meet some objective criteria of success, that the stigma surrounding their feeling of depression or isolation are likely even worse. Depression is a disease of hopelessness, despair, and self-loathing. We live in a culture where successful people, like probably every single one of you in this room today, and particularly men, can't easily talk about their inner turmoil. And why should they when they're potentially met with judgment? Or what do they have to complain about? They have it all, they've achieved success. And if one has made it to Google, for example, where there's boundless success everywhere, it might even be harder. And they've succeeded in spite of their inner turmoil. So like Styron explained, you continue with the many normal aspects of your life. You get up, you go to work, you go to dinner, you read bedtime stories to your children, you kiss your wife, your spouse, you grab a beer with your pals, all the while suffering and battling your demons and chiding yourself for not being able to better resolve it, amplifying that feeling of hopelessness and self-loathing. It becomes a vicious cycle. Add to that relationship, legal and financial woes, physical health issues, all of which can become, according to the CDC, triggering events. And then there is a recipe for more despair. Ultimately, suicide is certainly a mental health issue, but it is also a community issue. Certainly, many people with mental health issues never take their own lives. And there are countless people who have managed to survive unimaginable, horrific trauma without being suicidal. And then there are many on the outside to seem to have it all, and yet they're suicidal. Imagine how shameful that might feel to that person struggling. According to many familiar with the statistics surrounding suicide, the existing data may be underrepresenting the true extent of mental illness in the US. But it also speaks to why eradicating the stigma around mental health and suicide is so necessary for suicide prevention. We need, as a community, to help lift the isolation that further intensifies the dysfunctional thinking of someone considering suicide. Experts agree that teaching people how to process loss and how to cope with difficult emotions is an essential aspect of suicide prevention. So it's fantastic that Google has all of these resources available to you. My daughter, unfortunately, is not alone in succumbing to the potent nature of depression. How many of you here today have in some way, indirectly or directly, been touched by suicide in your lives? And that's pretty typical. It's almost consistently 100%. I mentioned to Dina this morning that after my daughter's funeral, we made a very specific decision to be open about the nature of her death because we thought that was something that she would have really wanted. And she was very open in her community about her eating disorder. So we wanted to honor that. I had no idea until after the service when people came up to me, one young man in particular, and said, I have to thank you. I'm so grateful because 10 years ago, my brother committed suicide, and nobody in our family has been allowed to talk about it. And today, you have just opened the door for me to actually process my grief. And that's when I realized how so suppressed the conversation around this topic is. Let me give you some idea of the dimension of the problem and the appalling lack of funding for the prevention, despite the magnitude of this issue. So in 2016, which is the latest data available, in the US alone, the number of deaths due to breast cancer was about 40,000. AIDS, 7,000. Suicide, 45,000. More than twice the number of homicides. Say that again. 40,000 breast cancer, 7,000 AIDS, 45,000 suicide. Add to this that for every successful suicide, there are about 25 attempts. The numbers are staggering. And they have been rising, sadly, very, very rapidly rising. The National Institute of Health spent approximately $700 million for breast cancer research and close to $3 billion for HIV/AIDS. And thank goodness for that. Now contrast that spent for suicide, a mere $68 million. Despite the fact that there are more deaths than by breast cancer and over 6 times the death rate of HIV/AIDS. And these are only a few of the many examples. Today, the number of suicides among our youth is rising. Our teenagers are especially prone to impulsive acts. Depression affects 1 out of every 5 college students. And that's the arc from college to careers. These are alarming statistics, and like I said, they're rising. One night, several of Dominique's college friends did a very brave thing. They called us. They were worried. Dominique had been talking about ending her life. They took her seriously, something that often doesn't happen. Good friends never keep a secret of someone talking about suicide, even if they are asked to. They don't assume that things will just work out. And I later learned from Dominique that she was relieved and grateful. When her friends reached out to her, she felt a wall of isolation lifted. They gave her a gift, and they gave one to us. We had 7 more months with her. Never underestimate the power of simply being there for those depressed and guiding them to seek help or getting it for them. Be brave, not indifferent. Care enough to intervene. And we can all make a difference by starting the conversation, which you all have. Offering support and lifting someone's overwhelming sense of being alone. We can provide community and a sense of belonging. Be there for people. Watch for signs. Signs like someone expressing a desire to die, or feeling hopeless with no reason to live, talking about being a burden to others or being trapped. Seeing someone's anxiety just increase exponentially. Noticing if someone is sleeping way too much or way too little. Or if they're withdrawing from others or talking about a future filled with pain. Ask someone if you are worried about if they are considering suicide. If the answer is yes, be there with them, keep them safe, and connect them to support. But most importantly, follow up and make sure they get help. Let them know they're not alone. Suicide is not inevitable for those feeling suicidal, which is evidenced by the effectiveness of the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Someone being there and helping someone understand that they are not alone is often enough to save a life. As you can imagine, all of this is far easier to accomplish when there is an open dialogue about mental illness and depression. Several years ago, I spoke at the college on this subject, actually my daughter's college. Sometime after, I received a note from a young woman who had been in the audience. She wrote that as she sat and listened to me speak, much of what I shared about my daughter's depression resonated with her. She realized that she too was depressed and suicidal. Just hearing me talk so openly about it was enough to give her the courage to call her parents and tell them how she was feeling. They withdrew her from school, she sought help, and she told me in this note that I literally saved her life. Only from a conversation. Only from letting her know she wasn't alone. Only from letting her know that she could get help. It could be different. I basically thought after that I could hang up because, I felt so good about having that kind of an impact, particularly since I hadn't been successful in saving my daughter's life. My daughter, tragically, took her life while she was hospitalized. They failed to pay attention to the things that she was saying about taking her life, chalking it up to her being dramatic or attention-seeking, and even communicated that to her. The stigma associated with her expression of suicidal feelings, even among some in the medical community, could have only made Dominique feel even more hopeless and shamed. We will never know what she was feeling that night. All we know is that later that night, she abandoned all hope. But we can't abandon hope. Remember that most people who are suicidal desperately want to live, but are unable to find another way to cope with their intense pain. Intervening saves lives. Suicide is a major global health crisis, but it is preventable. That's why I started Dominique's Fund for Suicide Prevention, and there are a number of fabulous organizations out there as well. I believe, and I know my daughter would have, that silence around suicide only worsens the hopelessness that many feel. That's why I must stand in front of you today and share what many might think is a private and personal family matter. Talking about this, again, should not be taboo. We are only perpetuating the misconceptions, the shame, and the blame when we remain silent. Our mission is to change the public perception of suicide by eradicating the stigma associated with it and the underlying mental illness, and to empower those who suffer from suicidal feelings to seek help. We are on our journey towards recovery, though none of us who loved my daughter will ever be the same. Suicide is said to leave survivors, the word used to refer to those of us left in devastated limbo. Imagine the battle of the parents, spouses, family of suicides. A battle where there is never an ending, never an answer, always and only terrible questions. I live with an unending struggle to understand. I replay every moment, every decision, everything I wish I had seen with the benefit of hindsight. That is a lot to survive. Imagine the shame and loneliness so many experience when they lose loved ones to suicide. Often, it's too difficult for people to even say to me that they are sorry for my loss when they hear the word suicide. It's lonely. Imagine the shame I feel. All I ever wanted was to be a good mother. My love, which Dominique knew and trusted and felt and wanted and needed, and I know that in my soul, was not enough. That is the worst thing for a parent, to realize that the deepest love possible cannot save a child's life. I must now survive my battle with the anguish and horror of having lost a child to suicide. My deepest wish is that Dominique could be here instead, to call herself a survivor. I am also possessed by the hope that others who are suicidal can be helped past the shoals of this devastating disease, and often very impulsive act. I have come, though it's taken me time, but I have come to understand that my daughter committed suicide to end her unbearable pain, not to create pain for the others she loved. The day after Dominique's death, I began searching through every piece of writing, of course, trying to find answers, desperate to know what she was thinking, why. And I found an essay, and I'm not exaggerating, an essay folded into a tiny square that just happened to be in my bedside table. And I had never seen it there. My daughter was a beautiful writer. I felt like maybe it was her way of trying to shed some light on it and give me some kind of understanding. It was a piece entitled, quote, "Dedicated to those who suffer in silence," unquote. It was mysterious as to why it was there. I don't know if she actually wrote it or if she copied it from somewhere, though I think it sounds like her voice. But in any event, I know it resonated with her. I'd like to share a part of it with you. Quote, "It's not that you don't want to live. You'd love to be happy. You'd kill to be alive, essentially. It's not the dying that's appealing. I mean, you don't really want to do it, but you feel like you have to. It's a matter of survival, really," which sounds like one hell of an oxymoron, I guess, to people who don't know. See, all life really is pain, every single damn day. And it's not pain you can look at. If I break my leg and it hurts, I can scream and I can point at my twisted leg and maybe a femur or a tibia is poking out to help emphasize my point. But when your soul, your inner being, your mind is hurt, you can't scream and point, unquote. And then she continued. People say to look towards the future, it will be a better tomorrow. What they don't realize is that you have looked towards the future, and it looks like absolute and total agony, which just makes you want to steer clear of the next week. People say it's selfish and a cowardly and easy way out. Sorry, but there's no ease involved. You don't want to die. You want to be rid of searing, hot, constant pain. Nothing that you can do to your body will come close to the torture that you live with every day. I'm honored, actually, to be here today. You're working in a company that has profoundly changed all of our lives, largely because this is a culture that believes that change is possible. Otherwise, you wouldn't even exist. And Google's now a verb. So you've definitely changed things. Eradicating the stigma and helping others out of isolated pain is something each and every one of us can impact and change. I think about the early days, not so long ago, of mental health treatment, when those with mental illness were often restrained with iron chains and shackles around their wrists and ankles. Today, the invisible shackles binding those with mental illness are the cruelty of misunderstanding, stigma, and discrimination, which our silence and passivity only perpetuates. We have made enormous progress in fighting this disease, but not enough to even remotely claim a victory. I hope that you will join me and embrace our mission and get involved. I hope you pass on our message and that you find the courage to talk openly about mental illness and suicide like I have done with all of you today, so that it stands among the other causes commanding our attention and resources. We have bracelets here for men and women. It's our dream that we see this bracelet on as many wrists as the yellow and pink cancer rubber bracelets, so that this too is understood as a disease that needs our attention. We want to tell the world to pay attention to suicide. We want these bracelets to honor those who have died by suicide and to remember them, and to symbolize our hope and our work to help prevent further suicides. We want to eradicate the stigma and make it okay to tackle suicide, like we've tackled cancer, heart disease, HIV/AIDS, just to name a few. The bracelet looks like this. It's similar to the silver one that Dominique loved to wear. It's etched with a French braid, a braid with 4 strands. Dominique loved her French grandmother and loved the French language. She often asked me to weave her long hair into a French braid, and her little sister reminded me that she could French braid her own hair in as much time as it took many of us to put our hair in a ponytail. So I guess that's the kind of thing that if you're a little sister, you're really looking up to the big one for. But I can still feel my hands on Dominique's head, where they were from the moment she was born, cradling that teeny miraculous new life, washing her hair, combing it, braiding it, and as she got older, stroking it, wanting to comfort her with all the love of a mother's touch. I can't help but think that the 4 strands representing the 4 of us in her immediate family, my husband Steve and her twin siblings, Elodie and Hunter, left behind to survive this terrible loss. Dominique once had a very bright future. She loved, and she knew she was loved. She had hope for all she could be. All of that is gone. I keep a lock of her hair, just as I keep in my heart the memory of her smile, which I shared with you this morning. Most of all, the braid is a symbol of the way in which we need to entwine our hearts, our efforts, our learning, and our promise, our help, in compassion for those who need us, for those who suffer in silence. Thank you. Any questions?
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much for coming today. And
Thank you for being here.
My question is, related to death by suicide, but also just grieving in general. What are some things that you wish people had done to better support you, or that they did do that was really well, that you could sort of educate us as potential supporters?
What a great question. Well, first of all, just understand that it helps to give everyone the benefit of good intention. People want to support people who have had loss. They don't always know the right thing to say, but they want to. So, if you approach it from that point of view, so I think one of the things that has been a problem for me is that even in my own family, not my immediate family, but in my extended family, they don't talk about my daughter very much. And that really bothers me. The first time I heard my father, bless his heart, he's 94 now and completely with it, talk about how many grandchildren he had to somebody after my daughter's death, he had reduced the number by one. And that killed me. And, I went to my father and I told him how I felt, and he never did that again. But I think the way that you can be there for people is not shy away. I mean, honestly, I cannot tell you how many people, when I was working at the time and I got back into the media business, and people who I hadn't seen since my loss could not even say, "I'm so sorry," because they just couldn't say it, because the idea of raising suicide, thinking that it would make me feel badly, even though, of course, you already feel badly, so it doesn't matter. So I think just being open and direct and asking people what you can do. How can I help you? What can I do to help you navigate your journey of grief? And I don't believe personally in the whole, stages of grief. I think everybody's does it differently, and everybody has their own experience. But I think it's important to just be there, to reach out, to check in, and to share memories of the person that's lost. Because as someone who loved someone who died by suicide, you want their life to be remembered. You want to feel that she had, in this case, a big impact on people, even if it was only 19 years. And many of her college roommates and her high school friends I'm still in touch with, and they share stories about Dom and things I haven't necessarily heard, and it makes me really happy. And I think the other thing that is really important, and someone did this for me, and just to share a little bit of how I navigated through this, of course, it goes in waves, and there are moments, holidays and other things where you really feel their absence even more acutely. But I had a friend come over and bring watercolors, and I hadn't, and Sandy's heard this story, Peter, I don't know if you have, but I'm like, I just lost my daughter, I'm not gonna do any water, I don't paint, nothing. And she said, no, just play with it. And for that one moment where I wet water and put some paint down, I was taken away. And I realized then that painting could be a good thing, because part of the grieving journey, and this is also something I think you can help people when they're ready, is to provide life experiences and distraction, and not keep them sort of out of living, because you think they may or may not be ready. But you know, these are all great ways too of coping with loss and any other tough thing. So I've been painting a lot, and in that moment when I'm painting, I feel taken away. And I have to say, there have been at least 2 times where I can honestly tell you that I think she moved my paintbrush. So it's been an interesting journey, and I think that's a great question because people need support and they need to be able to talk about it. Any other questions?
I have a question. Thank you so much. You mentioned that, you know, how to show concern for somebody that you're worried about and the impact of just asking them very specifically if they're thinking about hurting themselves. During your grieving process and your research on this subject, have you learned any tips that you could share with the room about ways to potentially approach someone, or, you know, certain verbiage even that might be helpful if they're worried about somebody?
I'll give you, I want to just say I'm not an expert on this. There are fabulous resources available, even one of your counselors. But what I do know is that it is important to ask if you have a question. I don't know if there's a special way to do that, but I think one of the most simple ways is, I know you're feeling really blue. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Have you ever thought about that? And if the answer is yes, you have to pay attention because it's not something that people easily express. And there is research, and maybe you can speak to this more, but there is research that indicates that asking the question is very important. If they actually have an idea of how they want to do it, that's really a very big signal that the severity of the suicidality is pretty significant and needs to be addressed.
Hi, my name is Dr. Angela Young. I'm one of the AP counselors on site. So I just wanted to add to that. Yes, it's true that you do want to bring the word, you know, suicide to the picture because it's not something that people often talk about. So as soon as you mention that, you also give room for the individual to share more. But obviously, like, you know, if you are not sure how to ask those questions, it's always okay to say, hey, like, you know, maybe we can find a counselor and we can talk about this together. There's a lot of resources online where you can hook someone up with a therapist. Like Psychology Today would be a good place to start. You know, or, you know, if you know a colleague, then concerning AP would be a great option. But yeah, like you want to know if they have thought about it, if they had, like, you know, if there's intent, like, or how to do about it, or when is the last time. And I would say for a layperson who's not in the field, you can always ask, what are some of the things that are keeping you alive? Like, so that you know if there is hope. Because a lot of times they might not be thinking about that, or they would be talking about maybe family, so then you know that they are thinking about something that is positive in their life. But if they couldn't come up with a reason, that's very alarming. You want to bring them to help as soon as possible.
And the National Suicide Prevention Hotline site has many links to, I believe it's called Be the One, that addresses that very specifically. What are the kinds of things you can ask? And it's a great resource. Thank you.